Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Let's Talk Arsenal series. It's time for a bit of a debrief and a look ahead to the upcoming Arsenal transfer window and season, of course. To do that, I'm joined by three fantastic guests. It's been a while since we've done a Canton and Simiu show, so I thought we'd get some extra guests on it for as well. Speaking of which, I'm joined by Harry Simiu. How you doing, mate? You good? You well?
Yeah, very good, mate. As you say, it's been a little while since we've spoken, so good to be back, and looking forward to chatting to the rest of this epic panel as well. What a lineup.
Indeed. Joining us today, we're also joined by Sophie from the Highbury Squad. How you doing, Soph? You good? You well?
Epic, lads. How's your summer off to? A good start?
Yeah, not bad. I mean, I haven't been all the way to Barcelona, but, someone has. He's very smug about it. It was a good trip, Harry. It was a good trip.
Yeah, it was a good trip. It was obviously work. I was working, obviously, all the hours under the sun.
Working.
It was nice to do in Barcelona.
Of course, lovely stuff indeed. And making up our brilliant panel this evening, it's none other than Andrew from Arsblock. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
I'm good, thank you very much. Hi, guys. How are you? And Sophie, how are you?
Very,
very
good. Podfather indeed, who enjoyed a fantastic live show with a cast of around, a cast of 900 people. That would be quite you need a lot of tables. That would be a hell of a lot of tables, but an audience of around 900 people, that must have been very nerve-wracking, Andrew.
It was a bit. We did with the guys from Arsenal Vision a show at Union Chapel before the final game of the season, and it was a bit nerve-wracking, to be honest. It's the biggest crowd I've ever sat in front of. Thankfully, none of them brought any rotten fruit or tomatoes to throw at us, and it all went off without a hitch. It was great. It was great. Really enjoyed it.
I'll save that for whenever I do a live show and get a few tomatoes from the Arteta out crew, maybe. Harry, or maybe they'll target Harry, to be fair. I think he's maybe the bigger target of the two of us. Anyway,
you did get heckled by a Millwall supporter, though, didn't you?
True.
We all
did happen at the Hippodrome.
So,
yes. We all did. Very annoyed that we were talking about Arsenal. Very pleasant. Yeah, for those that haven't watched our live show at the Hippodrome, you should just to see the very angry Millwall supporter that really went for us. I thought Lee handled it fantastically well, but other than that, it was a very entertaining show, and certainly one, if you haven't watched, you should go and check out over on the Highbury Squad and Lee Judges TV. But we're here, of course, to discuss what is quickly turning into a bit of a stressful summer, it seems, for some. I've certainly experienced that from many on our 8 a.m. shows. The chat box is, why have we not signed anyone? And it's June the 1st, and I'm trying to make sense of why people feel like... I've put a poll into the chat box, and the question was, is it too early to be criticising Arteta and Edu for the lack of business the club have done? The two options being yes, obviously, and the other, no, I have my reasons. 35% of people still saying no. They feel there is a right to criticise Arteta and Edu for the lack of business up until now. Harry, have they got a reason to be angry? And, I know I'm coming across really condescending with this question, but I just can't get my head around June the 1st and criticising already.
Just go and enjoy your summer, people, and just chill out for a little bit. Just take a couple of weeks to relax and reset and try sort of wind down a little bit. There is no need to lose your minds about the transfer window at this point. The transfer window isn't even open. We know that deals of such a high value, barring the last week of a transfer window, are rarely done so quickly. We know it's going to take time. We know that players are going to want to look at all their options. We know that clubs are going to want to try and identify replacements in some cases before letting people go. There's just so much that still needs to be worked out right across the football world ahead of this summer and ahead of when we're going to see the most and the significant movement. So I just think people need to chill out and relax a little bit. We're being linked to anyone and anyone at the moment because we know that, as content creators, we know that this is that time of year, right? We know that, you're going to get reports from various outlets in various different countries, sort of putting 2 and 2 together and sometimes coming up with 7. That's just the way it is. It's the nature of football media at the moment. And I just think we got to be careful not to latch onto ideas and get carried away by thoughts that maybe don't have anything really behind them at this point. So I'm chilled. I'm relaxed. I'll talk about players that I'd like to see come in, and when a report comes up, I like to give my opinion on whether I think that player would be a good fit or a bad fit. But I'm not really clutching onto any story at this moment in time. I think it's too early.
I'm just experiencing a little bit of connectivity issues. I'm hoping that you can hear me fine and well. For some reason, it was just cutting out. I heard most of what you said, though, Harry, and I assume it was very informative and great to listen to, as the chat box, I'm sure, will say. Sophie, how are you kind of feeling around this topic? I know that, there's been some criticism of Arteta, rightly and wrongly, that we've gone back and forth about in the past, but June the 1st and pressure already being on Arteta and Edu for this window. Do you think it's more around the expectation and the disappointment kind of leading into the summer after we missed out on 4th place?
Yeah, just a note to fans. Life is a glass of wine. It's not a shot of vodka. Okay. Sometimes you just need to sit back, let it marinate, smell a little. It's so early. And there's always pressure if you're Arsenal manager, if you're the man who's been given the keys to the kingdom, and you know that you have a large portion of the fan base who are going to be critical no matter what you do. Some of it deserved, some of it not so deserved. But I want to know, ever since Tottenham started finishing above us in the Premier League, we do have a large portion of the fan base that compare us to them. I don't think the pain of finishing 5th would have been as great if Manchester United had finished above us. That's just my 2 cents. You can agree or disagree with me on that. But because it was them, because they were the ones that in the end won that race, the sky's falling. And I understand that because we had a golden opportunity that we missed. And they signed a player early yesterday, albeit a player who some consider over the hill, some might still consider can do bits. Obviously, he's played for Antonio Conte before, and I think the panic sets in. They're already doing business. Why aren't we? If we're going to believe what Edu said, that they had already identified who their targets and they had their strategy set from even last summer, then I would say give it some time. I would like us to have our signings in before the summer tour. I think that's really important for continuity and also for, players that haven't played for the club, of course, before coming in and settling in. So for those reasons, I understand why fans might have some impatience, because I do prefer get the business done. You already have a young team, and I'm hoping that we bring in more experienced players. That's going to be my thing this summer. Is I don't want more youth. I don't want more young players. I want us to bring in experienced players, and let's try not to be snobby and overreact if a player comes in. I think that's one of the things as Arsenal fans we need to, get a hold of ourselves a little bit, in a sense that, okay, a couple seasons ago we're linked to Johnny Evans. The snobbery of being attached to a player like that, or us even signing him, I think it was Kevin that said on our show, champagne living on beer prices. Sometimes our taste is a little over what we can afford. So I hope that we're able to kind of manage the expectations and also not turn up our noses at players who can come in, have Premier League experience especially, and add something to the youth that we already have in the squad.
Well said. Yeah, I think that, the snobbery something is really... It sounds harsh at times to call it, but it is what it is. Call a spade a spade. It is, in my view, snobbery at times that we look at certain players that have been linked. They come in and do we really need that type of player? Do we want that player? Are they good enough for Arsenal? And then they often go on to prove us wrong. I think we've seen that of a few players that came in the last summer window. Ramsdale is the one that stands out most. How many of us, me included, wrote him off? And I've been guilty of that snobbery, I think, myself. So it is about having more of that open mind. Andrew, just to get kind of your thoughts on, obviously, the hyperbole that goes on at the moment about the window too, but also kind of your own expectations of what you're hoping to see for this summer.
I mean, like the others, it's really early. And I think the question you have to ask is, the big question is, do Arsenal know what they want to do? And I think they do. I think they know where the gaps are in the squad. There's no two ways about that. So if those players arrive before the start of the season, then we're in good shape. They don't have to be here on June the 1st. We don't have to react to what other clubs are doing. We have to do our own business. We have to do exactly what it is that we need to do. And we all know the positions that need to be filled. We know a couple of positions that are maybe a little bit questionable, that we might need some greater depth or something different in those positions. So I'm pretty confident that they know what's missing from this team. And, you only had to look at it last season to see where where we fell short. The centre forward position is a big one, and obviously I think central midfield is another one where we need something a little bit extra as well. And there are other squad positions. There's some depth to be added, because just in terms of numbers, to be back in the Europa League, we're going to need a bigger squad. Arteta wants 22 players, outfield players, and 3 goalkeepers. As it stands, we could have about 15 outfield players. So there's business to do. They know what needs to be done. But it's quite funny. I really haven't seen a lot of angst or panic or people going crazy certainly on my social media timeline anyway. I know that's out there. That's always out there, though. And I think you have to kind of look, I get it. Everyone's anxious. Everyone wants signings. Everyone knows we need them. But I think you have to let them work. And if we get to the end of the transfer window and the business isn't done, then we've got big problems, but not right at the start of the window. And as I said, I think Edu, Arteta, the people at the club can see very clearly what's needed. And that's going to be the focus on what we do during this transfer window. We've seen some names linked. Some of them are very good names who would really make a big difference to this Arsenal squad, who would come in and be first team players straight away. And we'll see a couple of those signings, I think, and we'll see a couple of the other signings who maybe come from left field a bit, depending on what we can do in terms of bringing money in and everything else. But let them work. The window's not open. I think Mikel Arteta is on holidays at the moment. He'll be back soon, and I'm sure everything will kick off then. Am I allowed to say he's on holidays? He is anyway. But
how dare he be on holiday? How dare he?
Unbelievable. Edu put off quite the summer while having barbecues, on boats and stuff last summer. So surely, we can still get business done. And it is mad. It is mad when we consider the fact that even in the discussion of seeing, I think Edu, because he's quite active on social media, posting, stories and things like that, the outrage that's in when he posts something when he's away, people are allowed breaks. It's part of being human. Let's move on to kind of the feelings around what we want to see from the summer window. I know we touched on it briefly, but in particular, some of the key positions. We can start with striker, because that is obviously the area, and the main point of discussion is in this early part of the window has been around Eddie Nketiah's mega contract, which has obviously dominated a lot of the discussion. Not signed yet, but reportedly £100,000 per week. Although what I would say is that wages are, as Elliot from the Arsenal Vision podcast pointed out on Twitter, so often inaccurately reported. We don't know what makes up that 100 grand a week. We don't know how much of that is bonuses, how much is that guaranteed every single week, what it's requires to get to that level, and the supposed £5 million signing on bonus. We ultimately don't know the specifics and how accurate that is. But Harry, even in the realms of that kind of figure, it's a lot. It's committing a lot of money if we are to assume that that's close to what it would be. And it was, I think, David Ornstein that replied to Semperfi Arsenal on Twitter's comment on his Athletic piece about the question of what's the priority. Would we still sign 2 strikers if we renewed Eddie? And the feeling was from David Ornstein that it would be Jesus, the priority, and Nketiah as kind of the 2 striker options. For you, is it the right decision to try and renew him for this kind of figure ballpark? And is one other striker signing kind of enough in that area?
I only ever expected us to go out and make one striker signing if we kept one of Lacazette and Nketiah. So I don't think there's any chance you're going to get Nketiah staying and 2 strikers coming in. I think that's way too much. And I think that when you look at some of the wide options we got, I'm not saying that he is a striker, but I think that there's an idea that Gabby Martinelli could fill that position if we were desperate. So I think that's all you're going to get, right? And the decision now is, do you keep Eddie Nketiah or do you try and go and add a second? I think I would prefer Arsenal to spend big money on the person, the striker that's going to lead our line for the coming seasons, rather than trying to split what we have available across 2 meh kind of options, if that makes sense. I think that I'd rather see Arsenal go out and go big on someone. And if that's Gabby Jesus, then great, because I'm all for that. I think he would bring a lot to the side. I think the thing with Nketiah is you got to remember that, okay, it sounds like a lot of money, but if he scores goals, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to bat an eyelid to the fact that he's earning £100,000. And I would probably argue that the going rate for a Premier League striker is probably about that anyway. I mean, how far off it can it be? You got to add into the fact as well that because he already was with the club and isn't somebody that we need to buy from somebody else, there is no transfer fee involved. Therefore, the player and his representatives will feel that they're in a position from which they can demand a higher pay packet. And you've got to factor all of those things in. And I don't think that people always do that. I think they look at it and they go, Eddie Nketiah, 100K a week. Since he's come into the side in this last part of the season, I think he's done an okay job. I don't think he's been amazing, but I don't think he's been bad. I think he's offered us more than Lacazette has, at least in the last few months, in terms of giving us a threat in behind with his pace and his ability to run channels. I think that he has popped up in some really good positions. And I think you've got to give him a lot of credit, because this is a guy whose future has been up in the air for such a long time. Like to be able to stay focused and do your best, and I do believe he's given his best, I think is a testament to his character and how much he wants to succeed. It's clear that Mikel Arteta feels a little bit of regret with regards to the way he's handled him, based on some of the comments that he's made. You know, he said, I've not given him enough chance. It's my fault, sort of thing. And I think Arteta is quite big on him. Listen, you look at the last summer and you look at some of those signings that we made, and I remember some of the outrage around some of those signings. Oh, what are we doing? And it goes back to that snobbery that Sophie was talking about. Sometimes when you see what happened last summer, where a number of players that we all thought were questionable have come in and done a good job, you need to then back off as a fan and say, you know, you can have your opinion, but you need to back off and say, right, at some point, I've got to trust them to do what they think is right. So if they think that's the right thing, and we go and get the striker, the number one striker to lead the line, I'm okay with Nketiah sticking around.
Fair enough. I think you highlighted kind of a lot of my thoughts around, you know, Nketiah, and I think that, and I hate that I use this example and people misinterpret it that I'm saying he's anything like Kane. But, you know, when you're putting in 5 goals in 8 starts, which was the same as what Kane did at the end of last season, and he scored 2 of those with penalties, annoyingly 1 against us, of course. If you can recreate that, I don't think anyone would bat an eyelid at the idea of 100K a week. It's just that associated risk with whether or not he can put it down, you know, next season and play that consistently. And it seems as though, Sophie, that if you're going to offer that kind of contract, it is not with him being a third choice person, you know, in the team. It's not with him being any kind of backup in the sense. It's to be someone that's going to play more regularly than he certainly has done. But is there an argument that if Arsenal want to close the gap with the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool, is Eddie Nketiah going to enable us to do that?
I think that Arteta, it's obvious that he's been hot on him. And there's a reason why he's tried to convince him to stay at the club on multiple occasions. Do I think he's the long-term answer over a period of 38 games in the Premier League? No. Do I think he's the type of player that can come in over a short period of time to have an impact? Yes. Now, some would balk at the. I don't think he's worth 100 grand a week, because it's proven previously that he's not the answer over a long-term period. I think what happens with our club sometimes is fringe players come in and do well, and then I don't know if it's the club or fans that then try to sell other fans on they're the long-term answer. You know, Rob Holding, I like him. He's a good kid, and he can come in and perform well over a short period of time. Is he the long-term answer at the back if we want to really build a force? No, I don't think so. El Neni, is he the long-term answer in midfield? No, but can he come in and play for a few games? Yes. It's a little bit like when we win the FA Cup. This team can go on and challenge in the Premier League. We have a side that can go on and really give it a go and be competitive. That's been proven not to be the case. So I would like for us to show a little bit more ambition. I stood by the signings last summer. I've always feel like until they play a game for Arsenal, you shouldn't criticize someone before they've even kicked the ball, right? I always felt that, you know, Tomiyasu was a good signing. A lot of fans act like they know who players are sometimes, and they just don't. Not everyone watches Serie A, not everyone watches La Liga, Bundesliga, Liga, or even MLS. You know, people poo-pooing the signing of Turner. Well, Turner kept Zach Steffen, who's at Manchester City, out of the US men's national team in qualifying games and is going to the World Cup. You know, so I just think sometimes we need to be a little bit more measured, but that doesn't mean you can't and don't want to be ambitious. And I think this is the window where we have to capitalize now, because we don't have the Champions League carrot to dangle, but we do have Europa League. And in the past, we've signed Aubameyang, Lacazette, Tierney, Gabriel, Thomas Partey, you know, with Europa League football. So is it ideal? No, but at the same time, your level of player that you can go after is raised a little bit. Last summer, we couldn't do that, you know. And with the players that we signed, some would say we got lucky, but some should say, well, that was really good scouting. So I think a little bit of a mix this time around is important. But I don't think Eddie's the long-term answer. I love the idea of Gabriel Jesus. I love the idea of Zinchenko. You're talking about two players who the manager knows well, who've played in championship-winning teams, who've played at the highest level in Europe, who've played for one of the most demanding managers on the planet, to come in and have an immediate impact. That's what I would like to see us do. If we don't do that, I fear that we'll fall further back. So it's important that we bring in players who can have an immediate impact on this side, not potential. We've done that before. And like I said earlier, I just don't want us to do that again.
No, neither do I. The Premier League proven side of things is certainly something I think Arteta has brought into, you know, the club. You know, we've gone for players that are, I mean, historically, Arsenal really didn't touch the Premier League in terms of real talent that was going into their peak ages, or players that were going to cost you significantly, because we were looking at opportunities, be it Luiz or going back to Danny Welbeck, etc. Players like this, we never really went for those types. Arteta tried it at the start with, say, a Willian, realised that wasn't really the path to go down if you wanted Premier League talent, and it instead changed last summer to Ramsdale and Ben White. And this season we're looking like we might see that again with the likes of Zinchenko and Gabriel Jesus, players that haven't yet reached maybe their peak years. So that's going to be interesting. Andrew, I'm interested to your thoughts, of course, on Nketiah, but as a side question as well, a lot of people kind of wanted to see maybe some contrasting characters and characteristics from the strikers that we bring in the summer. We often talk about how Arsenal lack physical presence in the final third at times. Is there a worry for you that Nketiah and Jesus, if Jesus is to be the striker, and he certainly seems to be our priority, that there's too many similarities about them and that maybe we would continue to lack that aerial presence from a striking perspective?
I mean, it would be nice to have it, but I mean, if you look at Liverpool over the last number of years, it's not like they've had a big man up front. They've done pretty well. Same with Manchester City. They brought in a big man, actually, haven't they, with Erling Haaland? He's a bit of a monster, so maybe they're going in a different direction. But look, it would be nice, but I don't think it's an absolute necessity. We look to have some presence from set pieces from our central defenders and what have you. With regards to Nketiah, I mean, I share the sort of doubts, I think, that most of you guys might have about his ability to be, like, I don't think he's ever going to be the number one striker at Arsenal. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, we could all be sitting here in a few years' time eating humble pie, but I'm not sure about that. What I would say, though, is that, if he signs a new deal, he's gone from being somebody who's worth nothing to Arsenal to an asset who, even if it doesn't work out, I think we can sell for decent money, because he's a young English striker with a great record at an under-21 level. I think the wage reports and what have you are perhaps designed to prey on the anxieties of Arsenal fans a little bit. This could be, you know, his signing on fee and his basic wage paid over the course of the season, whatever it might be. And the other thing I'd say is that, like, this is really the first run he's had in the Premier League at Arsenal, the first run of consistent games that he has had, because he's always been behind, like I said, he's always been behind Aubameyang. And in that run, he did more than I thought he was going to do. He scored more goals than I thought he was going to score. He had more influence than I thought he was capable of. And that's only an 8-game run. And I think next season, if we bring in Gabriel Jesus, he's probably going to be second fiddle to him as well. But I think what he has shown in these last few weeks is that he could be a pretty valuable player for us in the Europa League group stages. So we don't have to run everybody into the ground. We can rest players in midweek when we start that Thursday, Sunday grind. He is capable of scoring at that level. And I think he's shown that he's capable of scoring at Premier League level as well. How much he can do, how consistently he can do it, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I've been encouraged by what he's done in the last few weeks of the season. He scored goals that Lacazette couldn't have scored. the decision to give him a contract wasn't made just based on those last few games, because Arteta spoke more than once about wanting him to sign a new deal. So they see something in him. They see potential. They see growth. They see development. He's only just gone 23 years of age, still pretty young for a striker. And the reality is, if we let him go, or if he goes for free, we've got to go and buy somebody who's going to come in and play that second role. And that's probably going to be more expensive anyway. You're going to pay a transfer fee. You're going to pay signing on fee. You're going to pay wages, you know. So from a purely financial perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And I think from a footballing perspective too, it makes more sense than it did 3 months ago.
Yeah, for sure. I think that with a player like Nketiah, there is always going to be a question mark over what he's capable of producing over a long period of time with consistent starts. And it's interesting to me, to be honest, that he would accept knowing that a top striker is also coming in. You know, if I take my Arsenal hat off for a second and try and put myself in the shoes of Eddie Nketiah, who of course has that attachment to Arsenal still and obviously would want to succeed at Arsenal, that you know that a 45, 50 million plus striker is going to come in. If I was him, you know, I would have been looking to move on. I would have been looking to go to a Crystal Palace, you know, or a West Ham, two teams that you would look at from a striking position and say there's a real opportunity at two Premier League clubs to nail down the number 9 spot and play every single week in the Premier League. So if he does stay and he does sign this contract, you know, I would have some questions about why he decided to do that. You know, is it because of that attachment to Arsenal? Harry, go on. I know you want to jump in.
I was just going to say, that's what scares me about this. That's the one little bit of this that scares me, is that it was only a few weeks ago that he spoke very openly and candidly about the fact that I think he said he'd signed the last time he signed a 5-year deal, he went on to play 33 games from the start. Yeah. And that, for me, the fact that he could potentially do this U-turn, I know it's a lot of money and I know that it's Arsenal Football Club, but the fact that he's seemingly willing to make this U-turn makes me worry about what he's been promised. Because to me, he is the second striker and nothing more than that.
But what about the idea that, like, you know, he's 23 years of age, you've been given a go, we have faith in you to deliver for this football club. This, we hope, is a football club that's going places. You know, it looks like we've got some real potential. There's a lot of work to do, but we can all see how with the right additions to this squad, we could be better next season than we were this season. So the idea that, like, I don't want to use the word the project because it drives me mad. But at the same time, he's come through the academy. He's playing with Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe and Gabriel Martinelli. And we've got Europe, and he knows he's going to get games in Europe, and they're going to bring in a good striker. They're going to bring in a good midfield player, and they're going to add to the squad. And you could be part of a team that could potentially win a European trophy next week or next season. You know, that I think is attractive to a player. I'm sure that they have incentivized him, as you have to do with any player that gets to this point with their contract. If you want them to stay, and they've got 3 weeks left on their contract, they hold all the power in many ways. So they will have had to incentivize him. But I also think it wouldn't have been a hard sell to Eddie to say, you are going to get some regular football next season. We've got 38 games. We saw what happened last season. We needed the depth in the squad. The lack of depth in the squad cost us in the end, and you are part of that. So I could see how that would be, for Eddie, a really interesting thing to get on board with. And the reality is, he's 23. If in 2 years' time it hasn't gone as well as he likes, then off he goes, and he goes and plays for Crystal Palace or Brighton or somebody like that on a regular basis, week in, week out in the Premier League. And, you know, why not roll the dice on what could be something fantastic for the club that you support?
I think he and his agent have played an absolute blinder. They
also
have
his agent as well, though. Remember, so it's a sensitive sort of thing to deal with, and Balogun's agent. So you know, just those sort of aspects to it are, you know, we can say they're not relevant, but we have to bear those things in mind as well.
Yeah, ultimately, it's only going to pay dividends when we see what he offers if he indeed does stay next season. And I'm not going to sit and rule out the opportunity to see what he's capable of doing. 22 years of age, I think now. He always in that interview, and I thought it was a really good interview with the Beautiful Game podcast that he did. It really hit home for me, kind of a player that I'd certainly written off just off the cuff, hadn't really heard from him, hadn't really seen him play. I didn't have an attachment to him as a player. But actually listening to him speak, there was a lot of empathy, I think, from myself, and I'm sure a lot of the fan base as well, into his situation. The fact that, that Harry pointed out a second ago, 30 odd starts in a 5-year contract is very, very low. Yes, he's young. And go on,
Can I ask you guys a question? Because aside from the negotiations and what's happening behind the scenes, what I mentioned earlier in terms of can he be consistent over a long period of time? When I went to the games and he played, to me, he feels more like an old school poacher, right?
Yeah.
As well as he's played, I didn't see him ingrain himself in the games too much. The Chelsea game was probably the best example of how he played. The West Ham game, I just felt like he was playing a bit like a goal hanger, right?
Yeah.
And he actually reminded me a little bit like a Chicharito at Man United. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time, 6-yard box, 8-yard box. Am I reading that wrong? Because there were times when Odegaard had such an amazing opportunity, who's the type of player that plays two steps ahead of everybody else, a little bit like Ozil in his heyday, right? Same thing with Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe. And I feel like he's just not as smart in reading the moment and the game the way those other front players are. That's what concerns me about him having a maybe bigger role over a longer period of time.
I think it's a fair concern. I think from my perspective, what he added on top of the idea of being like the fox in the box, the poacher, as you described, is the energy that he brought to the front line that Arteta demands so much, the pressing, the forcing of mistakes from defenders that we saw obviously against Chelsea. I was looking at his stats yesterday. He's in like the 90 plus percentiles of pressures, per 90. It's just a joke how much energy this kid's got in a team. And his movement is getting a lot better. Perhaps maybe what we're asking from him, what you're asking for there, while he hasn't got these certain abilities that maybe, elite striker would, is probably put down to the fact that he's just not been given the opportunity on a regular basis to develop those instincts enough. And I feel like what I saw over the last 8 starts was a player that rose in every single game. There were games where he was a little bit quieter, and probably because the game state didn't suit him as much. But I certainly feel like what I saw in the game against Southampton, which wasn't too much, obviously into the game against Chelsea, where he had a very instinctual performance, to the final game against Everton, I saw a rise from him in just that short space of time. Some people might put that down to playing for a contract and all that, and that's fair. And until next season, we won't know whether or not that's the reason behind it. But I certainly felt like I saw a player on the up in such a short space that effectively could become kind of a coiled spring for Arsenal, that when given the opportunity more consistently next season, that he does explode on the scene. But it's a risk.
I get where Sophie's coming from, though, because I think that if you think back to when Arsenal played their best football in the season just gone, I would say it was with Lacazette up top, when he was dropping into those deep holes and he was facilitating the explosion of the Sakas and the Martinellis and the Smith-Rowes. That for me was when Arsenal were at their best point this season. And I think that is just a different type of centre-forward game. And I don't know that Eddie's got that type of game in his locker. Is it something that can be coached? Is it something he can learn and develop? I feel like, taking into account what his strengths are, you'd be taking away from some of what he's good at and sort of risking and hoping that he'd be able to pick up some of the things that Lacazette during that period was doing very well. But I've said throughout the season, I think we need something in between. We need somebody who can do what
is
Lacazette
Jesus
does.
That for you?
I think he's more that. I think he's more that than some of the other options we've been talking about. But I think without the thing that was always missing with Lacazette was the threat in behind. And there was never any of that. And it was always reliant on him dropping deep and then one of the wingers going further up the pitch and being that threat in behind. And we didn't have any variation to our game at that point. So I don't know. I like Nketiah, and I think he's got a lot to offer in a lot of ways. But I don't think he's a sophisticated enough centre forward to build a system around at this point up until now in his career.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The biggest question for me, maybe not the biggest, but certainly one of the biggest, is now what happens to Folarin Balogun, because I imagine Balogun would have signed that contract with Arsenal thinking, well, Eddie Nketiah is going to go, in the summer. I'm going to get a great opportunity to get into the Arsenal first team. For me, he has to go on loan for a full season next year, maybe to a Forest or a high up Championship side or a lower Premier League side to get that regular experience to prove what he's worth. Because say it doesn't work out with Nketiah this season, say Nketiah barely plays, doesn't get the opportunities, or when he does play, doesn't impress. And, maybe another team comes in for him, and this was all just an exercise to try and, keep that value, which was something we haven't really touched upon in this argument about Nketiah is, maintaining a player's value, because Nketiah could be worth significantly more than maybe we think in, say, a year's time after a full season, whereas he would have gone for absolutely nothing, or your compensation fee to another English club maybe, but beyond that, utterly nothing. So maybe that's the tactic behind it. It is one that time will only tell with this. I'm conscious of the time because I wanted to talk about a couple of other topics and get to some of your questions. So we will move swiftly onwards to kind of some different positions, asking each of you guys individually about some different areas. Sophie, I'm going to get you to tackle the versatile fullback idea of the summer. Obviously, we've seen some links to the likes of Aaron Hickey. We've seen links to Federico Di Marco at Inter Milan, or rather loose ones indeed. Nahuel Molina at Udinese has also been linked. A number of names to players that can play on both the left and right-hand side, more so Hickey and Molina in this case. Is this two parts to this question? One, is this an admittance that Nuno Tavares hasn't worked out, because they are the majority of them are naturally left-sided, although they are versatile? And secondly, is this a position that needs to be prioritized, more than maybe people consider it needs to be?
I'll try and be a bit shorter on this one because I know that we're pressed for time.
It's all right.
I think there's a couple of admissions here. One is that Nuno probably is going to take a while to marinate, and whether or not he ends up being the answer, I think is something that's a different conversation altogether. He's kind of like, he reminds me of, like when you're kissing behind the bike shed and, the young fella's all tongue and no technique.
I've never kissed a fella behind the bike shed personally, but
or a girl. He needs a little finesse, right, to say the least. I like Hickey.
Who ironically works quite well with your analogy there.
Yeah. Shall I just quit while I might be ahead? I'm not sure. I like him a lot. He has a lot of tenacity, and I think he's got that Tierney vibe about him that our fans love. But he's also exceptionally talented. See, I ruined the Podfather. He's gone. I don't know what happened. Maybe it was
I'm sure Andrew will be back in a second. He just didn't like that analogy at all.
He's gone to the bike shed.
I think
we
thought you'd really disliked that analogy, Andrew. Then
no, it was great. It was great. I got a bit too excited.
I think the other admission is that we can't continue to lose valuable players at certain periods during the season for a longer period of time. Losing Kieran Tierney, remember the argument after Nuno's first couple of games? Oh, he can replace Tierney. No, he can't. Tierney is a really good player who's valuable to this team and the way Arteta plays. Losing Thomas Partey, huge, right? Losing Tomiyasu, massive. So I think the admission is that we need to have better quality when and if injuries come. And I think, the left back situation, the right back situation, I think they need to be addressed. Tierney, this season, if he has the same type of season, is he going to be the long-term answer for Arsenal? And I do believe that, we have to be a bit more ruthless and start looking ahead versus being too reactionary. I like Dest, by the way. I don't know how expensive he will be.
If Clive's watching, he's going to hate you for that.
Is he?
Clive can't stand Sergino Dest, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, he can't stand him, yeah.
Oh, I think that he's a talented player. And I believe that, coming into being a squad player, I think that he could add some value. And I know you're just asking me about those positions, but I think the midfield as well is so important for us as well in order to have that cover. So I like the players that we're attached to. I just really like us to sign them quickly if we're going to do that. But they're also in demand by other clubs who may be able to offer them a little bit more than us.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, it's an interesting position, I think, that will be tackled. Hickey is a really intriguing option. I haven't seen loads of him. We did a tactical breakdown on him yesterday alongside DeMarco, and there are areas of his game obviously that need to develop. He's 19 years of age, playing in Serie A, which is a very high goal scoring league at the moment, and playing in a Bologna side that don't give him enough opportunities to get forward that he would obviously with at Arsenal. So when you're comparing stats to say Tierney and Tavares, it's a little difficult, but he's highly praised by people that watch him week in, week out, and it would be an interesting asset to get into the team, especially someone that can play in both sides, especially one that's more adept to the left, because I'm really interested by Brooke Norton-Cuffy and what he might be able to offer our right-hand sides in the next couple of seasons.
Again, a bit more experience though, Tom, right? Like,
yeah, of course.
As much as these players are exciting and they'd probably be great signings, you'd rather go after a Zinchenko, of course, who might be a bit, is he out of that price range? I don't know,
And he can obviously offer more in midfield as well. There's
right.
talk of what he could offer in the left-sided central midfield position that maybe you definitely don't get from someone like Hickey. Andrew, I'm going to give you the fantastical world of William Saliba and centre back to discuss. Centre back's an interesting area for me because it's something that I've discussed in the past about maybe we're underestimating the need of maybe replacing someone like Rob Holding with as Sophie's talked about, an experienced heads. If there's a position that Arsenal lack experience for me, is that centre-back area. People have spoken about the likes of Kalidou Koulibaly, who I don't think would be gettable for Arsenal, really, but that kind of profile. Saliba returning, of course, is a plus, and having a core group of Gabriel, White and Saliba is exciting. But is it an area that you think Arsenal are thinking and maybe people are underestimating the need to strengthen in?
I don't think we should underestimate the need. You want to be as strong as possible to compete in the Premier League and in the Europa League. I think I was in the minority at the start of last season in that I thought Saliba going on loan was a good idea. When you've paid £50 million for a central defender, you've paid £27 million for a central defender the season before. He was really young. I think the loan has worked out fantastically well. From a development point of view for him as a player. He's had a great season at Marseille. He's made some mistakes along the way, of course, but that is normal. That is what young central defenders do. So I thought Arteta's comments last week were really interesting, where he said he has to come back. I'd like to see him back. I think he gives us better depth. If we're not going to do something with the right back position, I like the idea of having Saliba in the squad who, let's say Tomiyasu can't play. We can bring Saliba in and Ben White can play right back. Because I think what the issue there's a quality issue, obviously, between Tomiyasu and Cedric, right? But it's also an issue of style. You've got two players who are chalk and cheese. The way that they play, what they give you, what they can provide, it's just so different that I don't think it's manageable. So Ben White is much more analogous to Tomiyasu than Cedric is. So Saliba, look, he's 21 years of age now. We paid big money for him. We've a lot to do in the transfer market. And it just seems like common sense that this is a guy who's on our books. He's our player. He's under contract for another 2 years. I know there's talk of a new contract. I don't know, much about that in terms of how minded he might be himself to sign a new deal with Arsenal. That's the big question. But we have him, and he solves a problem. He saves us money. Well, he saves us money. We spent a load of money on him a couple of years ago, and we've got no value for that money whatsoever. Like, he hasn't played a single game for us. So I think it's time that he gets a chance. He would provide us with good depth at centre half. His long-term future, that's another question. But again, maybe if he comes in and he's playing regularly and he's competing for a place in the team, then he might be interested in staying again for a team that hopefully is going places. But I do think that the left and right back positions are important this summer, because there is a gap in quality between Tierney and Tavares and between Tomiyasu and Cedric. And you can get away with it for so long, but I don't think you can get away with it for sustained periods. We had a long time this season without Tomiyasu. We had a long time without Kieran Tierney and Thomas Partey, and I do think that in spite of the bits that we were missing, the very important pieces that we were missing in this squad, I think we would have got where we needed to go if those two guys had stayed fit and if Tomiyasu had stayed fit. I absolutely do. So that's something we have to consider. We can't go into next season and not think about, I love Kieran Tierney, but let's be realistic. He's had injury problems. We can't just ignore that and say, well, let's hope. It's like all the seasons we went in hoping that Diaby would stay fit and hoping Jack would stay fit. And, you know, we loved them and we loved their talent and their potential. But the reality of their bodies, if you like, was telling us a different story, and we didn't prepare well enough for those. So I think that is something that has to be under some serious consideration, because if we get to the tail end of next season and we're hopefully, you know, playing Europa League quarterfinal, semi-final and final, and we're pushing for, you know, hopefully top 4 in the Premier League, and Kieran Tierney breaks down again, and we go, oh, well, we can't say we weren't expecting it. So thinking about that in a very serious way, I'm sure, is part and parcel of what Mikel Arteta and Edu are doing this summer.
Yeah, look, the Saliba one is going to be, it's just one of those situations that we need to get wrapped up and clarity on early as possible in the summer, because otherwise it will drag on. I think that there's a lot of noise from, you know, the French side of things in particular, because I think the French media are obviously keen for him to stay in France. You know, you want to see so much talent leaves that country to go elsewhere, that seeing one of those talents remain is obviously a big plus, and seeing him in the France national side is great. And that's also a big thing with the World Cup. Is he going to get enough minutes at Arsenal to guarantee him a place in the French side? Even if he was getting minutes at Marseille next season, you know, with the amount of talent that hasn't been available to Didier Deschamps, it doesn't mean that Saliba would be in the squad. You know, he was there for the first time through not only merit, but certainly availability issues with who else wasn't there. So it's a really difficult situation, but one I look forward to seeing the outcome of, which I think will be decided this summer. Harry, lastly, before we tackle a couple of questions from the chat, I think by the powers of deduction, we've reached the central part of the midfield. Yuri Tielemans looks to be the primary target, it seems. Although he wanted Champions League football, there are indications that he would still be willing to make that move to Arsenal, but there are other clubs interested. Man United, Spurs are also said to be circling, as I'm sure a number of European clubs are too. Is he enough of an upgrade to significantly say that we have taken a step forwards for the midfield? And if he isn't, how easy is it to upgrade on a player that both me and you have nearly fallen on our swords on a couple of times with Granit Xhaka? How easy is it to find an upgrade on what we've got already?
I don't think it is that easy, because I don't think that Granit Xhaka is a bad player. I think he's got the odd moment in him. We've seen that time and time again. You know, he's been at the club for a long time now, and we've seen the good and the bad of Granit Xhaka. But for the most part, particularly since Mikel Arteta's arrival, he's been a really solid and consistent performer. And I think that makes it very difficult to go out there and just pluck somebody out who can come in and do a better job. I think for me, what's really, really interesting with the midfield question is, what is Mikel Arteta's end goal in terms of what does he want to see from his midfield? Because early on in his tenure, and for a long time, it was a double defensive midfield pivot of Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey. And then we started to see that little bit of a shift where Partey was the lone kind of holding player, and Xhaka was being asked to play in a much more advanced role, get closer to the attacking play. And I think, although he did a pretty good job of that, he just doesn't look quite 100% right. He looks like he's missing something there. Whereas Yuri Tielemans, for me, would be a great fit for that. If you told Yuri Tielemans, you know, you get to go forward and join the attacking play, and you get to get yourself into the penalty area and in and around it and try and impact the game that way, I think he's a great fit. But what we get from Granit Xhaka that we wouldn't get from Yuri Tielemans is that when it does get tough, when it gets difficult, we have that ability in game to shapeshift back to that sort of double defensive midfield pivot, which should give us a bit more stability. One of the things I was critical of Mikel Arteta earlier in the season was there was a couple of games where I thought we got a little bit exposed trying to play with that one-man defensive midfield, and we didn't change it quick enough. I think Crystal Palace away is one that springs to mind, where we could have, I think, tightened things up a little bit before the issues started happening. But I think if you're looking at it that way, if you're looking at Tielemans as a sort of, I don't know what they call them nowadays, an 8 rather than a 6. I think that's what they call them. If you're looking at that, then I think Tielemans is a good fit. But that's for me if you keep Granit Xhaka in and around the squad as well. I mean, I don't see the point in bringing a Tielemans in and moving Xhaka on, because I don't think that strengthens and bolsters the squad. You're taking away from one area to add something else. But yeah, I'd rather have it all. And I think we need that kind of depth. We need those types of options. So I'm all for Tielemans, but I think his role wouldn't be, I'm the new Granit Xhaka. It would be a different role, and with a view to fitting in a slightly different way.
No, I like Tielemans, and I think that it's always going to be a testament to Xhaka when you talk about how difficult it is to try and get, that significant upgrade on him, as always. We've got about 10 minutes left. I think that's enough time to get a question each before we wrap things up. Sophie, we'll start with this super chat from Mark, which is more of a statement, but I'm going to turn it into a question, who says, I really don't have faith in Edu or Arteta. Far too long we have not filled all the holes in our team. We need at least 10 players. So with that in mind, do you agree with the point that we've not filled the holes whilst Arteta and Edu have had their tenure at the club in recruitment? And do you agree with the number of players that Mark is suggesting there?
Super Kev said on our show that we need 8 players, obviously not in one window, but he felt in order for us to really build a strong starting 11 and good depth, that's the number that we need. He would love to see 2 strikers come in. Obviously, midfield, cover at left and right back, centre back. I think that we keep aiming for this Man City, Liverpool, but I think there's a couple more steps to go before we get to that level and that stage. You could say that if Liverpool lose Salah and Mane this year, what does that take out of their team? Football is cyclical, right? They went 30 years without winning the Premier League. Manchester United have gone on how many now? 7 years without winning the Premier League. How many years have they gone without winning a trophy? They've gone through 4 or 5 managers since losing a legendary manager. It might be that Arteta still isn't the answer. It takes years to recover from having one man in a position, and a very powerful position, that built a culture and an identity and a DNA that has now been completely lost. And we're trying to rediscover what Arsenal 2.0 is. I've been very critical of Mikel Arteta, as you guys know. I don't think finishing 8th and getting us kicked out of Europe after being in Europe for so long and losing to the man you replaced isn't acceptable if you're an ambitious club. But we're also a very different club now. I think we also tend to forget sometimes too that when we signed Petit and Vieira, they weren't very well known. When we even signed Arsene Wenger as manager, everyone was like, who the F is that? So there's some revisionist history. And at the same time, football's moved so quickly and it's full of instant gratification. And, I think that you need to adapt and change. And I'm hoping that they are learning from mistakes, because they have made some. And they've had several windows now to get this squad built right. But at the end of the day, it's night, and there's only one person who can really truly change how we invest, and that's the owner. The owner could say to them, here's 300 million this summer, go spend it. But he's not going to do that. So they're working within a system, a framework, and a budget. And as much as I think that they need to be a bit smarter, I think their hands are tied also because of the ownership that we have. And go read an article that was just written about the Denver Nuggets. They just let probably the most talented director of personnel in all of NBA go to the Minnesota Timberwolves because they didn't want to pay him. They've whiffed on first draft budgets, draft picks, and not built on them. Their jewel in the crown right now is the Rams, and Arsenal and the Denver Nuggets and the Colorado Avalanche that could go on to win the Stanley Cup this year are their cash cows. So that's something that also needs to shift and change. And Mikel and Edu are not responsible for that.
Worrying times. I hate how uneducated I am on, the American side of stuff, and genuinely reading things like Sophie suggested there helps a lot. So I encourage you to check it out. Andrew, question from AJ Morgan, who says, how reliant is our top 4 chances next season on Chelsea, United and Spurs stagnating?
It's a really good question. It's hard to know because, look, the only difference between us and Spurs last season was the fact that they've got 2 world-class forwards and scored lots of goals. Chelsea, I don't know what's going to happen with them. I don't know too much about the new owners. Maybe Sophie could give us a lesson on that afterwards. But, they're pledging the new owners. They're going to come in and spend big. United are a shambles, an absolute mess, a disaster of a club. And they're going to spend their way out of it because that is what Manchester United do. That's what they've been doing for years, by the way, and it hasn't worked. So, fingers crossed they can continue the great work that they've been doing. It does look as if they've realized that they can't just keep throwing money at shit and expecting it to turn into gold. Look, all we can do is just do what we need to do. I find it difficult to worry too much about all the other teams because I'm more focused on the job that we have to do and the gaps that we have to fill in our squad and the depth that we have to add and the quality that we have to add. And then when it comes right down to it, we've got to play the matches and win the games and score the goals and do some of the things that we didn't do this season. Would it be brilliant for us if United continued to stagnate? Yes. If Chelsea fell apart, fantastic. And we'd all like to see Tottenham on fire. So, if those things happened, I think our chances of being in the top 4 would be greater. But ultimately, I think we can take encouragement from quite a number of aspects this season, and we can see why we fell short. We can see it, and we're going to add those pieces. And if those pieces can come in and make us 10% better, then we've got a good chance of making that. So for me, it's really all about what we do. I can't, it's June the 1st. I can't worry about those other teams. I don't care for them, their fans, their owners, their players, none of them. I'm not going to waste any of my energy on them. And I will look solely at what we've got to do. And then, when the season starts, let's kick on from there.
It's something that I hear every single summer. It's that, Chelsea are going to be better next season. United are going to be better next season. Spurs, that always gets thrown up in the case of like, what are Arsenal going to do?
Why can't we be better next season?
Absolutely. We should focus on ourselves. But also, people say this about United and that, but United would, as you said, awful, so bad. And it was enjoyable how bad they were. Chelsea fell away from a title ambition. They were pegged as these title challengers, and they fell away. Ironically, for the same reason we probably missed out on top 4 is that they lost their starting fullbacks for so much of the season. And I think that we just, as you say, you just absolutely need to focus on what we need to do, what areas we need to improve, and focus on playing each game by game once again. Our final question, Amir, specifically asking for your view on this, Harry. For Harry, why do people always mention the back-to-back 8th place finishes and never put any stock on the FA Cup victory?
It's a good question.
Just because it was for you, is that why?
No, it's genuinely a good question because, listen, I think with anything you can, your opinion, whether you think you're doing it or not, has an element of bias to it the way you say things has an element of bias to it based on your underlying opinion. So if you're not an Arteta fan, then naturally you're going to point to the 8th place finishes, whether you are meaning to do that specifically or not, it's going to come out, I think. And if you're talking as someone who backs Mikel Arteta, then you're probably going to be more inclined to mention that FA Cup victory. So I don't really read into that too much. I think they're both factually true, right? So you can't criticize anybody for saying either of those two things. But I think that I don't know. I just really hope that, we do have a positive summer in terms of what we never know what it's going to do exactly or how it's going to pan out, but one that we can all get behind and go into the new season with some of the energy that we experienced last season in terms of the togetherness between the fans and the team again, because that was for me the best thing about this season. I know 5th place was higher than most people gave us a hope of finishing in. And so in that sense, I think it was a positive season. But the biggest takeaway from me was that connection again. And I felt it in the stadium week in, week out. I felt worse when we lost and better when we won than I had done in the previous couple of seasons, where you start to creep into this kind of place of apathy. And I think that's the worst place to be as a football fan. So to have that connection again is really important to me. And I just hope that we have the positive kind of vibes from the summer that we can take into the new season. And hopefully we'll be talking about back-to-back, or a European finish followed by a Champions League finish as opposed to 8th place ones.
Back-to-back progression would be lovely. That's what we'd
Exactly.
love to see. I was worried you were going to say back-to-back fifth place. I was like,
I was going to say, I nearly said that.
It's a good job I didn't get the FA Cup question.
We've run out of time, unfortunately, Sophie.
Yeah. What a coinky dink.
Very quickly, though, Gunnar, thank you for your donation. Asking a very quick question. I do play the Invincibles at midfield. Arteta worked with an elite midfielders at City and under one in Pep Guardiola, but now they tell us that midfield of Xhaka, Partey, and Nenny is good enough. Well, hopefully they don't think it is, and they're going to sign someone in the summer to prove that it isn't the case. I'd like to massive thank you to my guest this evening. Thank you for taking the time to come on the channel. We really appreciate it. Chat box, if you could show them some love, and of course go over and follow all of their own content creation platforms. Harry, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. Tell people where they can find you.
Thank you, man. Always a pleasure to be on. You can find me on the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast on 90 Min Football or anywhere else I pop up. But you can follow me on Twitter at Harry Simi, easiest thing.
Lovely stuff. Sophie, always a pleasure, especially when we get bike shed analogies from yourself. Really appreciate that. So tell people where they can find you, of course.
Visit Highbury Squad. Check us out on YouTube if you want to follow us on Twitter. Some great content with Super Kevin Campbell. And we have our summer series going, doing a little bit of fun stuff as well. So come check us out. And go the Lionesses this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. Do check out the summer stuff, not only because, I'm going to be there as well for a show, but do make sure you check it out because it's going to be a lot of fun and taking your mind off Arsenal, which is also important. And finally, Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to come and have a chat. Tell people where they can find you and what you're going to be up to.
Arseblog.com, just doing all the Arseblog stuff all summer long as we always do. So that's where I'll be. Yeah, that's it.
Lovely stuff. Thank you again, Harry, Andrew, and Sophie, for coming on the channel. Much appreciate your time and answers as always. Thank you, Chatbox, for listening. Do drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you are indeed new. I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early, of course, at 8 a.m. for all the latest Arsenal transfer news updates. And other than that, it's been a real pleasure to speak to you, as always. And as always, up the Arsenal.